The air in the terminal hummed with the controlled chaos of travel, the low murmur of conversations, the rhythmic click of rolling suitcases, the disembodied voice of announcements echoing from above. Amidst the sea of travelers was Zara Johnson, 21 years old, her posture radiating a confidence that belied her age. She was on her way to a business meeting that had the potential to define her career, a simple flight that was meant to be a routine step in a carefully planned day. Zara clutched her first-class ticket, the crisp paper a small anchor in the bustling environment. She was no stranger to high-end airlines or the cold, polished efficiency of their terminals. The sleek marble floors and perfectly pressed uniforms were designed to soothe, but for Zara, they often did the opposite. She had learned the hard way that beneath the veneer of luxury, the same petty judgments of the outside world persisted. They were microaggressions, small, sharp cuts that reminded her she was a guest in a world that wasn't quite built for her. As she reached the check-in counter, her unease sharpened. The flight attendant, a woman in her late 20s named Tiffany, moved with an air of brisk, unquestionable authority. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. Zara had seen that look before, the subtle condescension, the way a person could be dismissed without a single word. When Tiffany's gaze landed on Zara, it lingered for just a moment too long. It was a look of appraisal, a silent questioning of her presence in the first-class line. "Good morning," Zara said, her voice steady as she slid her ticket and passport across the counter. Tiffany's thin smile tightened. She tapped at her keyboard, her movements sharp and deliberate. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone devoid of any actual apology. "Your ticket isn't registering in the system." Zara blinked. "There must be a mistake. I checked in online this morning." "Can I see your passport again?" Tiffany asked, her eyes flicking from Zara's face to the document in her hand. Zara passed it back, a knot of confusion tightening in her stomach. Tiffany examined it for a moment, her expression turning to one of cold certainty. "This doesn't look authentic either." The words hung in the air, baffling and absurd. Zara had traveled internationally for years with that passport. Before she could form a response, a sound cut through the terminal's hum. Wham! Thud! It was a sharp, violent rip. A collective gasp rippled through the line. The flight attendant, Tiffany, held the two halves of Zara's passport, her expression unreadable. Time seemed to stop. Conversations died. The frantic tapping of keyboards ceased. In the sudden, profound silence, all eyes turned to the counter. "Fake documents are a security risk," Tiffany muttered, tossing the torn pieces onto the counter as if they were trash. For a moment, Zara couldn't breathe, her heart hammered against her ribs. That was her identity, her proof of existence, now just shredded paper in the hands of a stranger. Her vision blurred at the edges, not with tears, but with sheer, blinding disbelief. A woman behind her clasped a hand over her mouth. A man farther back spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. "I saw her passport. It looked real to me." But no one moved. They were spectators, their phones already emerging to capture the scene. Zara felt her legs tremble. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of destruction, an exercise in power. That was my real passport," she finally managed to choke out, her voice a broken whisper. Tiffany offered a smug, dismissive smile and gestured for Zara to step out of the line. "Maybe if you knew how to book a flight properly, you wouldn't be causing problems for everyone else," she said, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. Zara felt a surge of white-hot anger, but she fought it down. She had been in situations like this before, though never this extreme. Reacting with rage would only validate the other woman's prejudice. She took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying herself. "I will be resolving this with management," she said, her voice low but firm, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. She stepped aside, her mind racing. Her father was the CEO of this very airline. A single phone call would bring the full weight of his authority down on this counter. But she hesitated. She had spent her entire life building her own name, her own reputation, refusing to use his influence as a crutch. This was her battle to fight. Finding a quiet row of empty chairs, Zara sat down, the shredded pieces of her identity feeling heavy in her hand. This wasn't just about a rude flight attendant. It was about a system that made her feel like she constantly had to justify her existence. As she sat there, a memory surfaced, a conversation with her close friend, Brandon. He had never told her the full story until recently. For years, every time he flew with a particular airline, He was singled out, pulled aside for random security checks that were anything but random. The constant suspicion, the humiliating searches, had worn him down until one day it broke him. He described standing in a small, sterile room, emotionally exhausted, while everyone else breezed through the gate. He eventually stopped flying with that airline altogether, the quiet dignity he always carried chipped away by 1,000 small cruelties. Remembering Brandon's pain, Zara's resolve hardened. This was no longer just a personal insult. It was a stand against the quiet, corrosive prejudice that people like her and Brandon faced every day. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about accountability. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady now. Her father answered on the second ring, his calm voice a familiar comfort. "Zara, what's wrong?" "Dad," she began, her own voice measured and clear. "Something just happened at the gate. A flight attendant named Tiffany refused my ticket, and then she tore up my passport." She took a breath. "She said I didn't belong in first class. She committed a federal crime, and I want her to be held accountable." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then an explosion of controlled fury. "What? Stay exactly where you are. I'll handle this. She will regret the moment she ever laid eyes on you." Zara nodded to herself. Her father would indeed handle it. But she knew this was a fight she had started, and one she intended to see through. Meanwhile, Tiffany was moving through the cabin, her confidence soaring. She recounted the incident to a fellow crew member, framing it as a necessary act of authority. "You should have seen her face," she laughed. "Some people just need to be put in their place." To her, Zara was just another person trying to game the system, someone who didn't belong in the exclusive world she so carefully guarded. She felt a rush of pride, completely oblivious to the storm that was gathering. She believed she had won. She had no idea that the young woman she had just dismissed was about to change everything. Zara was no longer just the daughter of the CEO. She was a woman who had found her voice, ready to demand the respect she was owed. The stage was set, and the power was about to shift in a way Tiffany could never have imagined. Prejudice had always been a known concept, an abstract headline, but hearing it from Brandon, the raw hurt and sharp-edged anger in his voice, made it visceral. It shook her to her core. Zara had never walked in his shoes, never felt the sting of being judged by the color of her skin. Yet his story lit a fuse within her. This was no longer just about her own pride. It was about standing for every person who had ever been made to feel small. The disrespect from Tiffany at the check-in counter, once a singular insult, now felt like a part of that same, larger story. Brandon's struggle was her struggle. His story had given her the motivation to speak up, not just for herself, but for all the invisible people who suffered quietly. The final boarding call echoed through the terminal, a sound that sliced through the thick tension at the gate. Zara focused on her breathing, trying to calm the storm swirling in her mind. The last few minutes had stretched into an eternity. Her father had promised to handle it, but an instinct told her something was about to break open, right here, right now. This was bigger than a torn passport. It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to demand what was right. As her gaze flickered toward the boarding gate, a movement across the concourse caught her eye. It was him, her father, the CEO of the airline, striding into the terminal as if he owned the very air within it. Flanked by executives, he radiated a calm authority that had built an empire. His tailored suit, his confident gait, the way his eyes swept the room, every inch of him was in command. The gate staff froze, their professional bustle ceasing as whispers rippled through their ranks. The CEO was here. But Tiffany, riding a wave of perceived victory, remained oblivious. To her, the matter was closed, the troublesome passenger dismissed. She approached Zara again, a smug smirk playing on her lips, ready to deliver the final blow. "I'm sorry," she began, her tone dripping with condescension, "but you'll need to purchase another ticket once you have a valid passport. We can't let you board with that one." Her voice was laced with a triumphant finality. But this time Zara didn't shrink. She rose to her full height, her posture radiating a calm resolve that silenced the air around her. Before Tiffany could utter another word, Zara's voice cut through, clear and steady. "You know," she said, her words deliberate, "you might want to reconsider. The passport you destroyed was perfectly valid, and my father is the CEO of this airline." The words hung in the air. Tiffany's smirk faltered. She cast a glance over her shoulder, and her eyes finally landed on the imposing figure standing just behind Zara. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of sickening dread. The color drained from her face. This wasn't just any passenger. Her carefully constructed authority crumbled into dust. I'm sorry, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. I didn't realize. Her father stepped forward, his quiet movement drawing every eye. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the bustling terminal fall silent. Tiffany, he said, his gaze unwavering. I've been in this business long enough to recognize an abuse of power. What you did was not just unprofessional. It was malicious and unacceptable. Tiffany's apologies were a frantic, incoherent jumble, but her father simply shook his head. This is beyond apologies, Tiffany. This is about accountability. You don't get to treat people this way. Not on my airline. As security officers discreetly approached, the torn pieces of Zara's passport were reassembled and verified before the stunned onlookers. It was, of course, authentic. The incident, however, was far from over. Behind the scenes, the wheels of a formal investigation were already turning. What began at the gate was now a case of severe racial misconduct. The story could have ended there, but a past injustice was about to find its voice. A former employee, a black woman named Camille who had worked under Tiffany years ago, reached out to Zara's father. She told a story of relentless harassment, of being belittled and pushed out of a career she loved, all because of Tiffany's prejudice, and she had proof. Camille provided a secret audio recording from one of her last, agonizing days at the airline. Tiffany's voice filled the stunned silence of the executive boardroom, dripping with contempt. I don't know why you're still here, the voice sneered. This job isn't for people like you. Then, laughter, shared with another colleague. They only hired her for diversity. Trust me, she won't last. People like her never do. The recording was irrefutable. When Tiffany was summoned, her arrogance had vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered fear. She tried to deny it, to claim it was a joke, to say it was out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming, a clear pattern of targeting black passengers and employees, of creating a toxic culture built on her own bigotry. Her reign of quiet discrimination was over. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Tiffany was terminated, banned from working for any airline under their corporate umbrella, and subsequently arrested to face criminal charges for her actions. This was no longer a private matter. News of the incident exploded online, and Zara's story went viral. It was as if a dam had broken. Across the country, people began sharing their own experiences of discrimination, a rising chorus of voices demanding change. Passengers, employees, people who had suffered in silence for years finally felt seen. Zara's father, true to his word, used the moment not to hide, but to lead. He initiated a company-wide overhaul of diversity and inclusion training, making it clear that this wasn't about punishing one employee, but about dismantling a culture that allowed such behavior to exist. Other airlines, facing public pressure, began to follow suit. Zara watched it all unfold, a quiet participant in a storm she had unintentionally created. She had never sought to be a hero, but in standing up for herself, she had become a catalyst. The incident at the gate had been transformative. She had walked away from it not with a thirst for revenge, but with a profound sense of justice. She now understood that her power didn't come from her father's title, but from the strength within herself to speak truth to injustice. Her voice, once quiet, had created an echo, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of an airport terminal, inspiring countless others to find their own. Her actions had ignited a conversation that echoed far beyond the fleeting glow of headlines. What began as a moment of quiet determination had become a current of change, reshaping the landscape of corporate culture and service industries for years to come. As the story of what happened at that gate rippled through the world, Zara understood with crystal clarity. She was no longer merely a passenger. She was a catalyst, and nothing could stop her now. The change she sparked within her father's company was mirrored by a profound transformation within herself. This was more than a single stand for what was right. It was a declaration of her own worth, and a defense of the dignity of every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. She came to understand that standing up for herself was not an act of rebellion, but one of reclamation. She was taking back a power that had always been hers, long suppressed, and wielding it not simply to demand respect, but to build a lasting legacy of it. In the months that followed, Zara shed the shadow of her father's name and stepped into the light of her own. She embraced leadership, becoming a tireless advocate for diversity and inclusion in every space she entered. With each conversation, her voice gained new strength, laying another stone in the foundation of change. Carrying the memory of Brandon's pain and his quiet strength, she found the courage to confront her own struggles. The incident at the gate had been the start of something far greater than herself, a movement for all who had been silenced for too long. Her fight was no longer just for her own dignity. It was for every person who had been wronged. She began to speak out, giving voice not only to her own experience, but to the invisible battles so many people fight every single day. The knowledge that her actions had inspired such change was both humbling and empowering. Zara was no longer just part of the conversation. She was at its heart, guiding it forward. The need to prove herself, to justify her place in the world, simply fell away. She had already earned it. And as she stood before crowds, her voice clear and steady, she knew this fight was about forging a future where worth was inherent and respect was a right, not a privilege, given freely, without question, without prejudice. Her journey was only just beginning.